Belarus has announced that it will host and deploy Russia's advanced Oreshnik missile system, signaling a significant escalation in military cooperation between Moscow and Minsk and raising serious questions for European security. According to the Russian state-run news agency TASS, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko's spokesperson, Natalia Izmont, stated that preparations for the deployment were nearing completion and that the system is expected to be placed into service in December 2025. This announcement follows months of signs of deepening military integration between Russia and Belarus and comes at a moment of heightened tensions with the West stemming from the war in Ukraine and NATO's eastern flank. To understand the significance of this move, one must first examine what the Oreshnik missile system is and what it represents. Developed by Russia, the Oreshnik, which in Russian literally means hazel tree, is described as an intermediate-range hypersonic ballistic missile, one capable of speeds exceeding Mach 10 and able to carry either conventional or nuclear warheads. According to reports, the missile is derived from the earlier RS-26 Rubesh system and features multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRVs, and submunitions. Its declared range places much of Europe well within its striking envelope. In launching a version of the Oreshnik in November 2024 against a Ukrainian defense industrial facility near Dnipro, Russia showcased the system's operational existence. Russian President Vladimir Putin has publicly claimed that the Oreshnik is impossible to intercept and that its destructive power in conventional mode is comparable to a nuclear strike, statements that have been met with skepticism by Western analysts. The weapon thus represents a qualitative leap in Russia's strategic arsenal, and its deployment on Belarusian soil marks an important extension of that capability. From Belarus's vantage point, the decision to host the Oreshnik missile system appears to be framed in the language of deterrence and alliance solidarity. President Lukashenko himself has described the deployment as nothing but a measure in response to the escalation of the situation, quote from his remarks. Minsk argues that Western military support for Ukraine, NATO's expansion, and joint exercises along its borders represent growing threats. Hence the need to strengthen its defense posture alongside Russia. The agreement effectively places Belarus outside the purely national framework of defense and more deeply integrated into Russia's strategic domain, signaling that Belarus is now a forward base for Moscow's long-range strike capabilities. For the West and for neighboring countries, the implications of this deployment are serious. Stationing hypersonic intermediate-range missiles in Belarus shifts the geography of risk. Whereas Russia's missile systems were previously launched from within Russian territory with flight paths that might transgress friendly airspace and incur early warning times, the presence of Oreshniks in Belarus means that many European capitals are closer to the launch point, reducing warning times and complicating interception. According to some reports, this could bring major cities in Poland, Germany, and even France within range, with far shorter missile fly time and less reaction margin for missile defense systems. Analysts warn that such deployment could force NATO and European states to reconsider their air and missile defense postures, as well as their strategic calculus regarding deterrence and escalation. Politically, the move strengthens the alliance between Russia and Belarus and deepens Belarus's role as a strategic partner rather than simply a satellite. Under recent treaties, Moscow has extended its nuclear umbrella to cover Belarus, meaning that Russian nuclear weapons may be used in defense of Belarusian territory. By hosting the Oreshnik system, Belarus is effectively becoming part of Russia's extended strike architecture, contributing launch infrastructure and forward-basing potential from Russia's perspective. This creates a deeper second front in Europe, complicates NATO's defense planning, and signals that Russia is consolidating its long-term strategic posture. Some analysts interpret the deployment as part of a broader shift after the collapse of the 1987 DNF Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Russia has been experimenting with new intermediate range systems, and the Oreshnik is one such weapon. On the military technical front, the deployment raises several key concerns. First, hypersonic glide vehicles and ballistic missiles at hypersonic speeds present unique challenges: reduced detection, response time, complex interception due to high speed and maneuverability, and coordination of warning, tracking, and defense systems. The Oreshnik, traveling at over Mach 10 and equipped with multiple warheads, presents just such a challenge. Second, basing such weapons in Belarus increases the operational flexibility. Mobile launchers can be dispersed, pre-poised for quick firing, and placed closer to strategic axes of Europe. This reduces Russian dependence on its internal rail, road, and air corridors and allows for launch from a less predictable location. Third, co-deployment with Russian command and control may allow rapid targeting and launch sequences, further shortening decision times for adversaries. Given that the system can use conventional warheads, it also blurs the line between strategic and tactical usage, raising concerns about escalation dynamics in a conflict scenario. From a diplomatic and strategic standpoint, the deployment is likely to generate increased tensions within Europe and between Russia, Belarus, and the West. The presence of such weapons in Belarus may trigger new rounds of arms control worries, regional deterrence dilemmas, and possibly spur NATO to redeploy or rebase missile defense assets closer to Belarus's border or extend strike capabilities of its own. The move may be viewed by European capitals as a direct challenge to their security, particularly for countries such as Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and the Baltic states, who sit on the front line of Russia-Belarus-Ukraine nexus. Already there are indications that Ukraine has issued warnings to Belarus against staging provocations in the context of joint exercises. Indeed, the upcoming joint Russian-Belarusian strategic drills, such as Zapad 2025, include training on the use of nuclear weapons and the Oreshnik missile system, according to Belarus's defense ministry. This layering of missile capability with nuclear readiness underscores the increased stakes, financially and economically. While the Belarusian economy is relatively modest, the strategic investment and the logistics of hosting Russian missile assets are considerable. Belarus is relying heavily on Russian subsidies, fuel supplies, and military hardware as part of the broader alliance. Hosting Oreshnik systems may lock Belarus even more tightly into the Russian orbit. For Russia, basing weapons in Belarus is a cost-effective way to extend its strategic reach without constructing new facilities inside Russian territory alone. It uses existing Belarusian infrastructure, friendly political relationship, and geographic proximity to Europe's eastern border to maximum effect. Domestically, in Belarus, the deployment may also have political consequences. President Lukashenko has long used a narrative of external threat and internal stability to justify his rule, by presenting the missile deployment as a defense measure against Western escalation. He strengthens his internal legitimacy, at least in his framing, of being the bulwark against external aggression. It also signals to domestic audiences that Belarus is not just passive, but active in its defense posture. However, there may be risks. Hosting strategic weapons could make Belarus a target in a major geopolitical conflict, increasing its vulnerability rather than reducing it. On the military strategic level, the timing of the deployment matters. With the war in Ukraine ongoing, Russia is under significant pressure in many theaters and may view forward deploying the Oreshnik system in Belarus as both a deterrent and a bargaining chip. By shifting some long-range strike systems closer to NATO's eastern flank, Russia may hope to increase the cost of Western involvement in Ukraine or to force NATO to alter its force posture. At the same time, the fact that Belarus will host the system by December 2025, as reported, gives only a short lead time for Western defense planners to adapt. There is thus an urgency to this deployment that makes it strategically salient. What are the possible responses by the West? A range of options exists: enhancing missile defense assets in Eastern Europe, increasing intelligence and early warning cooperation with Baltic and Central European states, offering reassurance and deterrence to frontline NATO members, and potentially deploying complementary strike systems of their own. Diplomatically, Western states may increase pressure on Belarus and Russia via sanctions, arms control negotiations, and increased support for Ukraine. The deployment could also prompt renewed discussion of arms control measures dealing with intermediate-range missiles, a category that was once constrained by the INF Treaty before its demise. In the longer term, the shift may force NATO to rethink its eastward posture and NATO planning to adapt to the reality of forward-hosted Russian strike systems. There are also broader implications for the military-industrial competition and missile proliferation. The deployment of hypersonic systems like Oreshnik serves as a demonstration of Russia's willingness to field advanced strike capabilities in theater, which may push other powers to accelerate their own hypersonic and precision strike programs. The United States, China, and other advanced militaries may interpret Russia's move as a signal that advanced weapons are now deployable in real-world settings, not just tests. That could spur a new arms race in hypersonics and intermediate-range missiles. Furthermore, the fact that these systems are being exported, or at least forward deployed in allied countries, changes the geographic calculus of strategic deterrence and raises questions about the spread of such capabilities in other regions. From the perspective of Ukraine and the immediate region, the deployment is especially worrying. Belarus shares a long border with Ukraine and is already used as a staging ground for Russian launches and operations. With Oreshniks based in Belarus, Ukraine faces a potential increase in long-range strike risk deep into its territory and fewer safe zones. The shorter flight times and the possibility of surprise launch from Belarusian territory may complicate defensive planning. Neighbors such as Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia will also feel the pressure. The possibility that their territories might come under quicker strike or that their missile defense systems will need to be expanded is significant. Ukraine has already publicly warned Belarus against provocations during joint exercises, citing past experience during earlier Zapad drills. In terms of legal and treaty implications, the deployment of intermediate-range missiles in Belarus raises questions about the status of the INF Treaty, which since 2019 no longer constrains Russia and the United States. The return of IRBM's intermediate-range ballistic missiles to Europe is widely viewed as a reversal of the post-Cold War arms control architecture. While Belarus is not a NATO member and is aligned with Russia, the very presence of such weapons on European soil may spark renewed arms control efforts or calls for new frameworks. The West may push for transparency, limiting or monitoring such systems, but the challenge is that Russia and Belarus are unlikely to voluntarily agree to constraints that they view as limiting their strategic advantage. It is also worth noting the signal this deployment sends about Russia's military doctrine. By integrating Belarus as a launch pad, Moscow demonstrates that it intends to defend and project through Allied territory, essentially extending its strategic depth westwards. The missile deployment is both symbolic and operational. Symbolic in that it shows Russia and Belarus are tighter than ever as an axis. Operational in that it alters the strike geometry of Europe. President Putin's comments that the Oreshnik could render nuclear weapons almost unnecessary in certain scenarios underline how Russia is combining advanced conventional strike with nuclear deterrence. Integrating Belarus into that architecture means that Russia is not only protecting its own territory, but also using Allied territory as a platform. That complicates NATO's deterrence and defense calculus, because a retaliatory strike against Russian territory might instead hit Belarusian soil, or require a decision about attacking a state that hosts Russian missiles. From a regional stability perspective, the deployment raises risks of miscalculation, escalation, and crisis. With shorter launch-to-impact times, particularly from Belarus towards NATO or Ukraine, there is less margin for political decision-making. A misfire, accident, or rogue launch could rapidly spiral into a larger conflict. Moreover, the missile's conventional capability means that its use might not automatically trigger nuclear escalation, yet its destructive power and speed could be interpreted as strategic, thereby blurring thresholds. This is especially concerning in a region already fraught with active war, border skirmishes, missile strikes, and high tensions. Turning to the perspectives within Belarus, the hosting of such a system may have internal consequences. On the one hand, it may be seen by the government as a boost in prestige. a recognition of Belarus's strategic importance by Russia. On the other hand, it may increase the risk that Belarus becomes a target in any future regional escalation. Hosting strategic missile systems that can strike Europe makes Belarus's territory a liability in the sense that it may draw first-strike attention in a crisis rather than being purely a passive actor. The Belarusian public is not widely reported to have been consulted about these decisions. In authoritarian systems such as Belarus's, strategic decisions are top-down. Nevertheless, the long-term consequence may be that Belarus finds itself locked into Russia's security trajectory with fewer independent diplomatic options. Considering timing and practical implementation, it remains to be seen exactly how many Oreshnik systems will be deployed, where in Belarus they will be located, under what command arrangements, Belarusian or Russian, and how they will be integrated into broader Russian missile command and control. Public reporting indicates that the first deployment is expected by December 2025 and that preparations are almost complete. It is also unclear whether the missiles will be permanently based in Belarus or operate rotationally, and whether Belarus will have launch control or the warheads will remain under Russian command. Some prior reports indicate that although Belarus will host the weapons, Russia will retain operational control, raising questions of sovereignty and command in the event of conflict. The performance of joint Russian-Belarusian military exercises, such as Zapad 2025, which reportedly include launch rehearsals and nuclear scenario training, provide some indicator of how these assets might be used. In sum, Belarus's decision to deploy Russia's Oreshnik missile system is a pivotal development in European strategic affairs. It represents a significant expansion of Russia's long-range strike architecture westwards, deepens the military integration of Belarus and Russia, and presents a tangible challenge to NATO's eastern security flank. The missile's hypersonic speed, multiple warheads, and conventional nuclear dual capability make it a strategic weapon whose deployment cannot be viewed simply as another base agreement. Instead, it alters deterrence dynamics, potentially shortens the time available for response, and increases the risks of escalation in a region already tense. For Belarus, it is a gamble, symbolically powerful and strategically meaningful, yet fraught with new vulnerabilities and obligations. For Europe and NATO, it is a wake-up call. The era of no intermediate-range missiles in Europe is over, and a new chessboard is in play. As we move forward, several questions loom. Will NATO and European states respond with increased missile defense deployments, or will they try to engage diplomatically to limit further deployments? Will the presence of Oreshnik missiles in Belarus force changes in NATO's nuclear posture, treaty architecture, or conventional force deployments? How will Russia integrate Belarus's territory into its overall strike planning, and will other allied states soon host similar systems? And how will Ukraine and neighboring states adapt their defensive strategies to cope with shorter range, warning times, and more potent strikes? The answers to these questions will shape the next phase of the war in Ukraine and the security architecture of Europe for years to come. In conclusion, the deployment of the Oreshnik missile system in Belarus is more than a strategic handshake. It is a shift in the balance of power, a challenge to Europe's security perimeter, and a call for a new strategic reckoning. The clock is ticking. December 2025 may mark the moment when Europe's security map is redrawn.